Okay, can you hear me okay? All right, great. I feel like a real preacher with a pulpit and everything today. Okay, I want to start off today by saying that we're going to be taking the passage that you heard read a little bit differently. I did a little bit of post-printing bulletin correction. We're actually going to be looking at just in chapter 7, verses 7 through 12. We're actually going to save the rest of the passage that Elizabeth so wonderfully read till next week. And my reason for doing this is two. Number one is the unit of thought that that begins at verse 13 actually fits better with the passage that we planned for next week. The second reason is that verses 13 through 20 in chapter 7 are actually a set of verses that have been highly debated in the church by excellent biblical scholars throughout the centuries of the church. There is a debate on whether Paul is speaking as a Christian or as a non-Christian in those verses. And as I was studying it this week, I sensed that my view on it might actually be shifting a little bit. So I'd like to have a little bit more time to research it before I preach it to you. So we're actually going to be handling just verses 7 through 12 of Romans. So let's get into that. You know, a lot of people in the church today are a little fuzzy about the role of God's law in their life. If Jesus has fulfilled the law, what role then does the law of God have in the Christian life today? Now, the Apostle Paul has just said things in the book of Romans, such as, we are no longer under the law, but we are under grace, and we have been released from the law. And the Apostle is concerned that maybe there are some Christians who might get the wrong impression about the law of God based on what he has said so far in the letter of Romans. So, as is his customary way of doing so, he asks a rhetorical question in order to open up conversation. He begins in chapter 7, verse 7, saying, "What then shall we say? That the law is sin?" Then he gives us the short answer, by no means. And then he goes throughout the rest of the passage to explain why he is saying by no means is the law sin. What role does the law have in the life of the Christian today? Well, the first thing we could say is that the law functions not as sin, contrary to that, but rather the law functions in order to show us what sin is. The Apostle Paul says, if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin, for I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. I know of an employer, and I'll have to be a little vague here, who had a new employee. And the new employee had made a request to be paid in the beginning of their employment in a rather unconventional way. Now, the employer himself had no problem with this arrangement. I mean, the employer actually would have benefited from this arrangement. And obviously, the employee wanted this because the employee is the one who made the request. But there was something that was bothering the employer about the arrangement, so he decided to consult his lawyer. And after asking the lawyer and setting out the situation, the lawyer said, absolutely not. Do not do that. And then the lawyer went on to show that actually there is another party in this arrangement that you're not even thinking of, and this arrangement would actually disenfranchise them, and there is a law on the books against doing this for that exact reason. Now, the employer originally had no idea about this law. If he had not consulted his lawyer, he would not have known that this was not something, according to the U.S. Pennsylvania Code of Law, that you should be doing. But after consulting his lawyer, he then knew not only the law, but he knew why the law existed. There's something similar about the law of God. The law of God actually tells us in an even much more authoritative way, what it is that God requires of us. We're oftentimes fooled into thinking that somehow humanity, the ethics of humanity have just organically evolved throughout time. But we know this is not so because we know that morality waxes and wanes in any society. We need to be told what is right and what is wrong. We're kind of blank slates in that regard. When I was little, I was in the grocery line with my mother, very little at the time, and I innocently grabbed a pack of gum from the rack that they had in the grocery line and slipped it in my pocket and brought it home. And when we got home, my mother realized that I didn't ask for that pack of gum. We didn't pay for that pack of gum. And at that moment, my mother, in no uncertain terms, told me you can't take something without paying for it. And we had to go back to the store and return that pack of gum, and I had to tell them what it is that I had done. I learned a lesson that day. I needed my mom to tell me what was wrong. Well, the law of God functions in a very similar way. God is the parent of all parents, the perfect parents. He doesn't want us groping in the dark to find out what is right and wrong. No, he reveals what it is that he requires us in his law. So there is this sense that the law of God still has a functioning purpose, even in the law of the Christian, who is no longer technically under the demands of the law, but under grace. No, that law still has a function for us. It shows us what it is that gives God pleasure. It shows us how we live our lives to honor God. It's a glorious law that teaches us things that we might not otherwise know unless God in his authority had actually spoken those things to us. So the law does have a function here, is that it does indeed reveal to us the requirements of the law. But there is another function of the law. And you can begin to think of it like this. If God has made his law and his requirements sufficiently clear to us, why is the world such a mess? If he has made his requirements for us sufficiently clear, why is my life sometimes a mess? If I know the right things to do, why don't I always do them? Well, it's in this way that the law functions in another way. The Apostle Paul in chapter 7 goes on to say in verse 14, "For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am of the flesh, sold under sin." Oh, let me back up to verse 13, the end of it there. Oh, wait, we're not in verse 13. That's why it's not making sense to me. Verse 8. But sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, that is the commandment to covet, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. The law actually teaches us something about ourselves, something so fundamental about who we are. When I was a teenager, I ran with a group of boys that were a mild terror to our community. On weekends, under the cover of night, we used to go around the neighborhood and steal for sale signs from the houses that had for sale signs in front of them. And we would take these signs and we would stow them away in an overgrown bend of the creek that ran behind our houses. And we had dozens and dozens of for sale signs, every company that you could imagine. They were piled up in the place that we stashed them. Now, why in the world did we think to go out and steal for sale signs from the front of homes? There was nothing that we could have used those signs for. We just threw them in the bend of the creek where they just got dirty and dusty and piled up. We had no use for them, and we knew the law. We knew that what we were doing is wrong, and if we got caught, we'd be in a whole lot of trouble. Why did we do it? Well, simply going out and taking those for sale signs nurtured in us this joy about being rebellious. There was just something fun about being rebellious and doing what we knew we ought not to do. Well, the Apostle Paul gives us the example of coveting. He says, before the law came along, I didn't really even know what coveting really was. But as soon as I was told not to covet, there was something in me that just rose up and said, don't you want to have those things, even if it means going about getting them in the wrong ways? The law of God actually shows us something about our nature, that rebellious streak that is in us. And interestingly, many Christians who regularly read their Bible actually cherish this function of the law. See, there are times in our lives when we go about and we run into problems, or we have a falling out in a relationship, or someone is just not doing things the way that we think they ought to be doing them. And we think that we're innocent of whatever this situation is. And then all of a sudden, some morning or evening, we open up our Bible, and all of a sudden we start reading and we realize that we're more complicitous in the situation than we thought. Maybe it was more leaning on their side, but still we began to see that maybe I do have a log in my eye that I should be taking out before I go to remove the speck out of other people's lives. There are countless times in our lives when we find out by reading God's law that actually we're not quite as innocent in pretty much anything than we think we are. We are like Adam and Eve, so prone after we sin to blame other people and never see our role in it. And Christians learn to cherish this. It's a course corrector for our lives. Even the rock star Bono once said, the scriptures remain a plumb line to gauge how crooked the wall of my ego has become. The scriptures remain a plumb line to gauge how crooked the wall of my ego has become. The law of God is like a spiritual x-ray. It shows us what is inside of ourselves. So we have these two functions of the law here, and we're starting to get somewhere. But in order to drive the point home, the apostle is going to take us through a sequence of events. Step one of this sequence is this, and he's using coveting as a test case scenario to walk us through the sequence of events. It says here in verse 8, but sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, that is the commandment to covet, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. For apart from the law, sin lies dead. I once was alive, apart from the law. What does the apostle mean that I was alive apart from the law? He meant before I knew what coveting was, I really thought I was doing okay. But when I really went deeper into what coveting was all about, I began to realize that there is coveting all over my life. I was coveting the money that other people had. I was coveting the success that I saw in others when I saw failure in myself. I was lusting after the woman I was not married to. I was wanting things in more ways than I ever imagined. And when I went deep into this law of coveting, before that, I really felt alive. But after I went into it, the second step of the sequence is, then I died. Apart from the law, I felt really alive. But when the law came, second part of the sequence, I became dead. You see, the law of God brings us under conviction. Take, for example, this is oftentimes what Jesus did, especially when he confronted the Pharisees. There's a lot of information out there today that really wants to picture Jesus as someone who is just against authority and power. And if that's what Jesus was all about, why did he spend at least twice as much time criticizing the religious leaders of his day than he did Rome, which obviously had much more power than the religious leaders? He was questioning the way that they went about interpreting and understanding the law. He He said, yes, you are so careful about tithing even your spices, your cumin and your mint. You actually pile onto the law of the Sabbath, and you go beyond even what God commanded in the law of the Sabbath. But you're actually ignoring all sorts of other laws. In your teaching about tithing, you're actually teaching people to break the commandment to honor thy father and mother by supplying for your father and mother in their old age. You're actually breaking other laws by telling me I can't heal on the Sabbath. Jesus oftentimes opened up the law. He never minimized it. He said, you know the law, not to murder. Say you've never killed anyone? Well, have you insulted your brother or sister? Then you've broken the command not to murder. Say that you have never committed adultery? Well, have you ever lusted after someone who is not your spouse? Then you broke the commandment of adultery with your mind. Jesus never minimized the command. He actually maximized it to show us just how deep the commands are. And that sequence of events, we might call that is the person who is under conviction. The sequence of events actually put us under conviction to show us things about ourselves that we did not know before. And that's where we actually get into the other function of the law. We're going to go with the third function here, and it's actually the most important function of the law. We have to take all the things that we've looked at together. First, to take that very last verse that we're looking at this morning, verse 12. Well, after going through it, the Apostle Paul says, so you see, the law is holy. That is, the law is holy. It comes to us from a holy God. And the commandment is holy and righteous. It is always fair. It never ever treats one person differently than it treats another person. It never demands from one group more than it will demand from another group. It is completely just and fair. And the commandment is also good, because it comes from a God who is good and always wants good for his people. But what about this dialectic? If the law is good, that I'm not. Not that the law is sin or evil or bad. No, the law is good. But if the law brings out in me my sin, what am I to make of that? And the third function of the law is this. The law of God actually teaches me my need for a Savior. By showing me my weakness, it actually shows me that I need someone who is stronger. Kind of like the patient who goes for a PET scan. And the PET scan shows them that they have cancer that might be fatal. It could kill them. Now, the PET scan can't do anything to save them, can it? But the PET scan can point them to and say, you better consult an oncologist who has far more experience and knowledge than you do about treating cancer. The PET scan points you to that. Or, let's say that you were in a very deep, dark hole for a very long time, and your eyes actually adjusted so that they were content to live in that deep, dark hole without ever knowing the joy of having the sun beaming down on you. And all of a sudden, the law takes a spotlight and puts it down that hole, and it shows you, I'm in a hole. But the problem is, it's not like it shows you that you're in a hole, and then all of a sudden you go, well, I will get out of the hole. Because as much as you claw, as much as you scrape at the sides trying to get your way out, you find out you can't. So what do? You call out from the hole, hoping that somebody who walks by will be stronger than you. You are waiting for someone's strong arm to go down in that hole and pull you out. The law of the God actually does something very wonderful for us. It shows us our weakness that we might be pointed to someone who is stronger than we are. And we're able to call out, oh, great physician, I can't heal the cancer in me. Will you heal me? And we say, oh, lover of my soul, will you put your strong arm down this hole, and I will grab hold of it and let you pull me out of it. law is not sin at all. Actually, it's good. It's good in every facet of what it is and what it does for us. And most importantly, it is good because it shows us our need for our Savior, Jesus Christ. We'll never receive the gospel unless our hearts are awakened to our need for the gospel by the way of the law. We shall never receive the gospel unless our hearts are awakened for our need for it through the law. Let's pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, we do thank you for your law. We have a very complicated relationship with your law. We thank you, Lord, that it is good, that it teaches us good things. But Lord, we also confess to you that there is this part of us that just likes to rebel against your holy, just, and good law. So Lord, use that law for the third purpose as well. Draw us into the arms of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Take away our pride, take away our stubbornness. Help us, Lord, to surrender to the only one who is strong enough to deliver us from that which we are too weak to deliver ourselves from. We pray all this in the powerful name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Please, as you're able, let us rise for a song of response.